Welcome to yet another episode of the Legacy Building Leaders TV show, where we profile the legacy building leadership stories of solution providers and game changers in different sectors of our economy. In today's episode, we are joined by Mr. Tawanda Muzamwese, the Executive Director of the Business Council for Sustainable Development Zimbabwe, and the Chief Sustainability Officer for the African Sustainability Consultants.
My name is Tawanda Muzamwese. I'm an international consultant in safety, health, environment, and quality management. I work with various organizations in promoting sustainable development in their operations. I was born in the Eastern Highlands of Zimbabwe in Mumhari. And I was born of an engineer and a teacher. And from an early age, my parents inculcated aspects of leadership within me and aspects of wanting to perform to the best of my capabilities. I studied at St. Augustine's Mission for my secondary school. And that period of time shaped who I was, because I picked up a lot of values of honesty, dedication, and determination. And as I progressed in my journey, from a young age, I started to pick up leadership responsibilities, and I was quite determined to succeed. I then moved on to the University of Zimbabwe for my tertiary qualifications, where I studied environmental sciences, which is the area that I mainly focus on. After that period of time, I went to Europe, in the Netherlands in particular, where I took my master's in environmental and energy management. I was very fortunate that the Dutch government, through the Netherlands Fellowship Program, awarded me a fellowship to further my studies in the area of sustainable development. And in all my academic endeavors, I've always attained distinction, because I believe that we must strive for excellence. Then on the professional side, I started my career as a scientist at the Scientific and Industrial Research and Development Center, SIRDC, as an associate research scientist. And this was the time before I proceeded for my postgraduate studies. I also took some research work in Germany in collaboration with the time that I was in the Netherlands. And that was very, very important to give me international experience, which already now, having done work in about 30 countries across the world, that exposure that I got from Europe was also quite critical in terms of shaping my leadership trajectory and journey. I returned back to Africa in 2011, and I joined an organization called Ionwood Consultancy as a safety, health, environment consultant. At that time, I started to work with mining companies, construction companies, manufacturing companies, in trying to prevent workplace accidents, in trying to promote environmental protection, and in trying to ensure that we would save resources, water, and energy. I decided in 2013 to leave formal employment, and I believe this was one of the most difficult decisions that I had to make for me to then become an international consultant. And I registered my consulting practice, and we began to work with companies to attain certification, including the ISO 9001 Quality Management System, the ISO 14001 Environmental Management Systems, ISO 45001 Safety Management Systems, because some of the companies which were approaching us wanted to export their products in the European Union, into Australia, into the United States of America, and they were being asked for standards, to say, do you have certification and standards? So I have been operating and leading my consulting division for about 8 years. And later on, as I was moving in my consulting career, which has seen me in about 4 continents across the world, Washington, D.C., I have done consulting work there. China, South Korea gave me the Asian experience for me to be running training, because in my work, I focus more on training, consulting, and auditing in order to improve companies. I also had opportunities to be doing work in Israel, the rest of Africa, Tanzania, Egypt, South Africa. And I have been quite privileged to work with different people, different leaders, young people in those different circumstances. In 2016, by appointment, I was then called upon to lead one of the largest industry associations in Zimbabwe, which is called the Business Council for Sustainable Development Zimbabwe, as an executive director. At that time, I was 30 years old, but already I knew that I had to take forward leadership seriously. I had initially become a board member for Southern Africa in the African Roundtable for Sustainable Consumption and Production at the age of 24. And it was quite normal for me to sit with many people who were older than me at different leadership platforms. And I think that helped me to grow very, very quickly. I've got a lot of colleagues from Tanzania, a lot of colleagues from Burkina Faso, South Africa, Uganda, who were helping me to grow in the board of the African Roundtable for Sustainable Consumption. So I've also led the Industry Association of the Business Council. And then the latest version of myself and my leadership capabilities and startup capabilities has come through in this COVID pandemic. When the COVID pandemic began, I began to take seriously issues of publishing. And I then formed a new publishing house in Zimbabwe. I've also written books that helps those who want to go into the consulting division. My philosophy is that success is not by accident. Leadership is not by accident. It has to be planned, and there is need to persevere through the difficult circumstances to get to your dreams.
We have listened to the legacy building leadership story of Mr. Tawanda Collins Muzamwese, his beginnings and how he has risen through the ranks to have an exposure that has taken him to 30 countries globally as an international consultant. Mr. Tawanda Muzamwese is an inspirational leader. In the next segment, he is going to be joined by Melba and Brook, 2 young learners whom he is going to inspire through his leadership story.
Hello, Mr. Tawanda. My name is Melba Mbasera, and I'm the head God Life Christian College. Now, I see the passion and excitement in what you do. What advice do you have for a young person such as myself in knowing their purpose and aligning it to a chosen career path?
Thank you very much for that question. What I would like to tell you and all the young people who are viewing this program is that passion drives everything. Passion drives leadership. If you've got a passion for what you are doing, or a passion for a certain career or a certain calling, you don't begin to see it as a burden. In my own personal experience, I realized my purpose at a very young age. I wanted to build capacity. And as of now, I've trained more than 5,000 people across the world. So every day when I go out there to run a training program, I don't see it as a burden. When I walk into my office to do environmental work, when I go underground, because I also spend some time underground in mines looking at issues of health and safety, when I go underground, when I go to a construction site, I don't see it as a burden because it is my passion. Passion drives everything, and I believe that as a young person, passion will work for you.
My name is Brook Machingura. I am a child ambassador from Lua Foundation. That ensures that children don't get abused, sexually abused. I'm also the executive director of K-Vibes, which is a branch of Youth Vibes Africa. So during your growth, you're a very well-known person, and I see that, well, you've grown to be a very well sustainable development leader. And in everything you do, you're always at the top somehow. What ensures that?
Thank you very much. The other thing before I get into answering your question is that I'm happy that as young people, you are taking responsibility. You are taking care of important causes, preventing sexual exploitation and abuse of young people. This is the time for you to start doing those things. And coming on to your question, the reason why I always come out on top of the situation in most of the projects that I do, in most of the initiatives that I do, and also in the institutions which I have led, there are three ingredients. The first ingredient is being self-motivated. It's very important that you motivate yourself. If you listen to what people are saying, more often than not, they will pull you down. It's not everyone who likes what you are doing. The second thing is I have shut my mind from negative thoughts. So I feed myself with the positive vibes, the type of material that I read, the type of music that I listen to, and the type of people that I surround myself with, including my associates, my friends, my business colleagues, and other leaders whom I rub shoulders with. They are people who have got a positive mindset. The last thing is setting targets. It's important that you set targets in what you are doing. Target setting starts at your own age. And graduating into becoming professionals, you must set targets. From a very young age, I was setting myself very, very high targets. I did not tolerate being an average, because the average is the worst, because it's not the leader, and also it's not the loser. So I refuse to be an average, and I always set myself key targets. And in setting those targets, I have also been benchmarking myself with the international fraternity.
You have achieved so much. You have helped many companies achieve ISO certification, and you have counseled over 5,000 people. What is the secret to achieving so much and being recommended or recognized at a very young age?
The secret behind that has been through collaboration. Collaboration is the best thing, and I think the key advice to you and our viewers today is that you cannot achieve it on your own. So if you are going to succeed as a leader, you need to be able to collaborate. The other thing is that there is need for self-development and capacity building and enhancing your knowledge in a certain area. The area you are talking about is an area where I've received high-level training from various international institutions. Exposure. I've been a very fortunate person to receive fellowships to the United States of America, fellowships to Israel, fellowships to the Netherlands. Those fellowships and those exchange programs and those training programs, they help to sharpen your skills.
As a sustainable development leader, you've achieved so much. You've written books, been in the African Roundhouse, and in this regard, what impact has made you proud the most?
Yeah, that's a very difficult question, because I savor every moment which I have attained. But I would say being selected as part of the 6 entrepreneurs from Zimbabwe in 2014 by the United States Department of State. I was part of the program, selected by the US Embassy to be part of the young people who were entrepreneurs, to participate in what we call the Business Entrepreneurship Exchange Program. BIP, which then saw me spend quite some time in Washington, D.C., and then working with some American organizations as part of that exchange program. And I think that program, it broadened my view of international affairs. It helped me to build networks.
You've grown to be such a well-known person. And yet, you started from the suburbs. You started from the villages, and what gave you that push? What gave you that mindset that you can do it, you can become who you are now?
When I was born, I was not privileged to have everything that I needed. But I was not a charity case either. Our parents did their best to provide for us. personally as a leader, I'm not really inspired by one or two personalities or XYZ personalities. What inspired me was my situation, and looking at the situation which I was facing at that time and my aspirations. So when I looked at my situation and my aspirations, what I wanted to have, what I wanted to be, and what I had at that point, those things were not matching. So you need to use your situation to inspire you. And I always tell people that use the resources that you have for you to go forward. There's no need to complain that I do not have A, B, C, and D resources. Use that as a motivation and start from where you are.
Legacy building leaders are there to help multiply themselves in the next generation of leaders. As we have seen Mr. Muzamwese inspire 2 young people who are upcoming leaders. In the next segment, we are going to look closely at the leadership legacy of Mr. Tawanda Collins Muzamwese. Mr. Muzamwese, we are very privileged to listen to your legacy building leadership story. You know, Nelson Mandela talks about education and exposure. What are the defining features of your legacy?
Thank you, Dr. Mugaviri. The defining aspects of my legacy are about getting the best out of organizations,
Right.
getting the best out of individuals. So each time when I organize training on environmental health and safety, I want to get the best out of an organization. Earlier on, we were saying that I have trained over 5,000 people from across the world. And what I want to see is companies exporting more products internationally, companies meeting supply chain requirements, and of course ensuring that we eliminate workplace injuries, because health and safety is quite a big aspect of my legacy. I want to contribute towards a safe work environment. Globally, every 50 seconds a worker dies at work. So part of my legacy is that I want to promote zero harm in the work environment. Part of my legacy is that I want to promote green living through sustainable development. I want companies and individuals which are environmentally conscious, reduce waste, save energy, and I also focus on the behavioral aspects. And earlier on we were talking about the role of education and exposure in terms of building a leader. It is my encouragement to leaders out there, chief executive officers, managing directors, heads of department, and everyone who perceive themselves as a leader, that we must keep on learning. We are now in the industry 4.0, where artificial intelligence is taking place, the 4th industrial revolution. And I think getting exposure is also quite critical. Personally, I've been very privileged to be to about 30 countries in 4 continents across the world. And most of those has been by invitation. So when you go to South Korea, Seoul, for example, one of the most sophisticated economies in the world, which in 1964 was a poor country, but is now one of the top green economies in the world. You get a lot of exposure from the Asian perspective. If you also go to America, you get the American exposure, the European, the Middle East. So when you combine those, and also when you look at your fellow African brothers, then you can be able to see the way of doing things. It is very dangerous for a leader to be close-minded.
Right.
It is very dangerous for a leader to keep only the values of where you came from or how you were brought up. International exposure helps you to see how others do things better, because the moment that you think we have arrived as a leader, you think we have arrived to the top of the mountain, that's the beginning of your demise.
How can leaders embrace a lifelong learning, culture within their own leadership? Sometimes even without the exposure of having to travel all over the world like we have done.
Thank you, Dr. Mugaviri. I think we are living in the most privileged times right now because of technology. You can take on additional capacity building and educational programs online. The key foundation is humility. The attitude of humility has been quite very useful to me to realize that I do not know everything.
Right.
The things that I know are just a small facet of the things that I have to learn. And the other issue for lifelong learning is personal motivation and personal drive. I know that if a person gets into leadership, they get a couple of benefits, from an organization. Again, some people, they then believe that I don't need to learn any new skills. But only to be shocked when companies do restructuring, when companies do rationalization. I've had to cancel quite a number of corporate leaders who are past their sell-by date because they went into a certain position and they went to sleep in that position because they thought they'd achieved something else. And I think this is what we want leaders to know, that in order for you to have a long-lasting legacy, you must have diverse skills so that you are not pushed in a corner in the rainy day.
Let's look at mindsets. I think this is a big area, and especially when you look at business sustainability, which is your forte. What leadership mind shifts do you think we need to have so that we can have leaders who fully embrace, business sustainability?
Thank you, Dr. Mugaviri. We are facing quite a number of environmental challenges right now.
Right.
Climate change is one of them. By 2030, world temperatures will rise by 2 degrees Celsius across different parts of the world. We are already seeing natural disasters, floods. Just move around in our city centers, towns, and look at the amount of waste that greets you. Leaders like yourself and myself, leaders of top-notch and blue-chip companies, whilst driving, throwing away litter. These are the problems we are facing. So we want people to understand that let's focus on environmental sustainability together with economic prosperity, and then we can be able to achieve sustainable development. So we are working with companies to ensure that they actually consider the environment as part of the business. The other issue is that we must not forget future generations. We want the leaders to have a mindset of thinking about the future, the people who will come after us. How are they going to use the same resources? So it means once you know that we've got a future, the way you're going to be using water, you use water in a sustainable manner. The way you are going to be using energy, you use energy in a sustainable manner. I wouldn't expect a chief executive officer or any leader out there to be leaving their office, with switches, lights, and gadgets on, while it's wasting energy. We know that Zimbabwe and also other developing countries are working to achieve energy security. Yes. But are we being energy efficient? And I think recently we have seen the introduction of the prepaid meters in our own homes. And this is when people begin to try and save energy because they are paying for that energy per unit.
That was the legacy building leadership story for Mr. Tawanda Collins Muzamwese, a man who has learned a lot, a man of great exposure, who has had the opportunity to study both locally and internationally, a man who has spoken to conferences and events all over the world in as much as he has been invited to all those places, and a man who has served by contributing as a legacy building leader on different platforms, locally in Africa and way beyond Africa on 4 continents. If you know of any person out there, a leader who has got a story that can inspire our nation and our generation, please feel free to send us their information on the details on the screen. We meet again next Friday at 5:30 on another episode of the Legacy Building Leaders TV show.